Hello, everyone. I am Lisa Christian, and this is my colleague Suzie Allard. We're both from the Center for Information and Communication Studies at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. We, first of all, want to give a nod of thanks to Elsevier for funding this project and allowing us the freedom to pursue this topic as independent researchers in the United States and the United Kingdom. So thank you for that. As the title of this session suggests, we are here to examine and to talk about the life of the scholarly article beyond the point of download, how it is integrated and shared into the scholarly work life of not just an individual, but the academic and professional communities at large. Over the last more than 12 years now, Project Counter standards have given libraries and publishers a proxy for measuring usage, but when we rely solely on those counter download stats, we are underestimating usage and secondary usage. That is, passing on of a downloaded or even an undownloaded article by hand or by email. An author sharing his or her copy may make it appear that usage is declining when it could be that downloads are declining. On the other hand, if they are sharing links and citations that refer back to the publisher website or library database, it could be seen that downloads are increasing. So it's a little bit of a tricky topic, and this type of secondary usage and sharing factors into download counts, and we may be missing that facet. In other words, how is sharing impacting this traditional download measure? And this is what the project seeks to answer. In effect, we have three essential research questions. What are download counts missing? What is the true or complete value of articles and their access, and how might that be measured? For this project, we looked at a three-pronged approach and methodology. The first was to identify a range of systems of formal sharing and informal sharing platforms. In general, we just focused, because of the enormous amount of sharing platforms available, we focused just on those that scholars are likely to use for research and teaching purposes. The second step was focus groups and interviews in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And the third approach was an international survey that was informed in our development of the questions by the first two processes. And as you know, there are many ways to share articles. These formal methods, some of which are shown here, fit easily into the scholar's work life and make the process of saving, citing, and sharing easier. And they are not only here to stay, but more are developed all the time and appear all the time. They are a positive evolution and aspect of scholarships, especially as we found in our focus groups and interviews in the way that our participants talked about these methods. And these are just some of the most frequently mentioned by our participants. And the informal sharing are systems that we identified that were not developed specifically for sharing or article management or citation in mind, and they are typically more widely used for other purposes than just scholarly. We had 4 focus groups in the United States and 15 interviews in the United Kingdom for a total of 29 participants. Our main goal in initiating these interviews and focus groups was to look at a real-time conversation in the academic and professional worlds about how these scholars and researchers are talking about article sharing and downloads and management and research teams. And we did this, again, in order to develop our questionnaire that we were going to distribute. It became clear that there were, of course, 2 main types of sharing. The first is a citation or a link to an article, and that was the most common in our surveys and focus groups. If the citation or the link goes back to the publisher's website, their download stats will capture it, but that might not be the case for the libraries, where a sending scholar originated if they bypass their library databases. The second means of sharing is to send the full text, which was most often the PDF, and this in our focus groups and interviews was more likely to be the user's own work. They were more comfortable with sharing the full text of their own articles or their own books in some cases. And the participants who also mentioned uploading their own work into institutional or subject repositories were the ones that shared the most often, and of course, we realize that this varies greatly by subject discipline. And the specific systems in use today that were most often mentioned, we sort of stole the idea of bootleg sharing from a focus group participant who named it this sort of murky, maybe illegal way of sharing material. This was the most frequently mentioned in our surveys and our not in our surveys, in our interviews, in our focus groups. And it was the passing of an article through an email and sometimes through an internal network within an institution, and just also by hand-to-hand in print. Again, this was normal behavior just made easier, which the participants continually said. This was just a part of their work life. But calling it bootleg does imply that they had an inkling that it might not be strictly legal in regards to license agreements, but the convenience trumps uneasiness, although a few people did say it had not even occurred to them that they might be violating any copyright licenses by sharing full text. It was just what they did as scholars. Oh, and I should say Twitter was the most frequently mentioned social media tool for sharing in our focus groups, and Dropbox was the most frequent for collaborators or for a research team. And the reasons for sharing, of course, was varied, but the most common mention was just it was to further scientific and academic discovery. Another reason to pass on what they felt was good or noteworthy or trustworthy, and that is to promote the reading of their own or someone else's work sometimes. And the next most common reason was because someone asks for either a copy of their own article or a copy of someone else's article that might be behind a paywall that they can't access at their institution. And again, these top reasons reflect the very nature of scholarship, which the participants continually stressed as well. And these formal and informal systems just made their work life easier. And these were reasons that were reflected in our survey respondents as well. And the third approach to our project was an international survey. Elsevier sent out an email invitation to a survey hosted at the University of Tennessee. We had 1,000 respondents scattered throughout the world, and the aim was to examine the download behavior and to estimate amounts of sharing and to try to calculate averages that take into account the different ways to share, and not only the differences in discipline, but other demographic characteristics such as age in your profession or your rank, your geographic location, and etc. The survey questions broadly looked at how scholars share, how much they share, and how much they download, and what do they do with these downloads beyond the actual point of downloading, what happens to them afterwards, and the varieties of methods of sharing that the participants used most, how they were ranked, how often they used them, the perceptions of sharing, and again, the demographic differences. Some of our questions focused on a critical incident of last download. We wanted to get a random sample of downloads by asking about the last incident of downloading material for a research project or a last teaching term. And this gives us a sample to get a broad range of download behavior. We recognize that this may not be typical of their download behavior, but it does allow us to establish patterns in behavior. And we did define articles within the survey as those found in print or electronic journal issues, websites, or separate copies such as preprints, reprints, and other copies downloaded electronically for these purposes. And Also, because of some confusion that we did run into in interviews and focus groups, we also defined downloading for our participants as accessing and saving scholarly articles from research engines, library e-collections, or other scholarly databases. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
I'm Suzie Allard, also at the University of Tennessee. And we promised you a peek at the secret life of a scholarly article after the download. And my colleague Lisa has done a great job of telling you how we went about looking for this. And I get to have the fun of telling you a little bit about our results. I'm going to start with that the life of a scholarly article is dependent on the people who are using and consuming or creating the article. So, an article doesn't have a life of its own. So in doing that, we had to focus on the people. And in reporting the results today, we had a couple different ways to think about it. And I decided, I'm not really interested in just giving you graphs and tables. So instead, we're going to talk about it from the point of view of personas. And these are personas that are representative of we chose 4 personas for today, representative of, as we were doing the analysis, of learning about what individual user types look like. And I have to give a big nod here to my colleague, Rob Anderson, who you all from SSP were kind enough to give him a scholarship to come and work this conference, and he did a huge amount of the analysis on this. So I really want to thank him for his work as well. I'll move this over just a little bit. But we really wanted to present these preliminary results by looking at it from a point of view of a persona. A persona is a fictitious, specific, and concrete representation of a user. So coming from a previous life that I once lived in the entertainment industry, I will tell you that the pictures are from clip art, the names are fictitious, and any representation in that point of view to a real or regular person is completely coincidental. However, what is real is the critical characteristics we're talking about and the behaviors they represent. And there are quotes that come directly out of our interviews and our focus groups. Those are all real. So what we are looking at is using 1,000 surveys, those 29 interviews, to start to talk about what emerged as a user. This didn't come from us saying, well, let's look at this user. This came from an analysis of saying, looking at the professional maturity, the life of their professional life, where they were on the maturity, how senior they are, looking at what kind of work environment they work in, what are these people, what are we finding, where are their real differences, and these are 4 we came up with. I'd also like to point out marketers use this technique a lot because it's a really great way to be, we use it a lot in software development for some of the things that we develop in other projects, because it's a great way to be able to think about how we're building things and the scenario of how people will act to try out your ideas. So our first persona is Charles. Charles is a PhD in the social sciences, so this is a disciplinary, not a hard science. He's in the social sciences. He's a senior faculty member. He's been there for 10 years, and he's working a lot in research groups. His research is primarily with teams. So what do his behaviors look like? Well, he really favors informal sharing methods that we talked about, emails and internal networks. Nothing too surprising there. He will also use these formal methods to share more with peers who are working independently of the research group. And in interrogating, and used in the nicest way, I mean that, our interviews, some of the ideas that came out there is that when a person's senior, they kind of feel they both have a larger network. Oftentimes they're moving outside their disciplinary area on looking at new ways to look at whatever their research questions are, new science or social science. And also there's a feeling of, I'm tenured, I can do more things. They also make use of a wider variety of the sharing resources than the researchers in the non-academic settings. And we're not exactly sure what that is yet. We're going back through our notes to interrogate and understand that better. Sort of a nice exemplary quote was Charles saying, "When I share papers, I do it with other colleagues that have access to the same databases as I have. It happens mainly in the following scenarios. I am doing a literature search on a subject we are working as a group and find some papers that are interesting to my fellow colleagues working with me. I send them the PDF, big surprise, so they can also read them. And then this person went on to talk about some other scenarios. But what is most interesting here is that he specifically mentions they have access to the same databases. He may have been sensitive to that issue. We don't know for sure. We have some data that we're teasing through on that as well. One of the things we found is not everybody thinks about what they're doing in that way because they're in the middle of doing scholarly work, and so they don't think about things outside that in terms of rights and such, but some do. Then we have Tenjal Mahatra. She is in the medical sciences, and she is also well into her career, very established, and is also working in a research group. But notice that she is not working in an academic environment. This is an area that we saw a major split. The academic researchers have a very different behavior than the non-academic researchers. Also, she shares with email, which is across the board. But this is really the main thing that she's using, is email. Not a lot of other informal or formal techniques. She and the others working with her don't really use internal networks or blogs or other informal methods of sharing at all, next to the other kinds of people that we looked at. And outside of research social networks and reference management software, she really doesn't do any kind of formal methods of sharing, so not really using a lot of the other tools at her disposal. You notice here her quote, "I work in a small research institution with very little budget for conventional acquisition of articles. 20 years ago, you could send a letter requesting a print of the article from the corresponding author. Nowadays, the internet and sharing makes this kind of sharing much more rapid and open." What we found here is that a lot of the people working outside of academics, the budget was something they were really aware of and thinking about how that applies to their workflow. And I'll close up with some conclusions and how these all tie together. And take notes in case you have questions, because we'd love to, the three of us can give some insights. Then we have Leslie. Leslie is a PhD in mathematics. I know we have a math interest in the back. Less than 10 years as a faculty member, and as a non-tenured person. Now remember, in academe, tenure really changes how you work. And we really saw that tenure versus non-tenure made a huge difference in the kinds of behaviors, what happened to the articles after they were downloaded. Most of her work is done independently of a research group, which fits with somebody who is in a non-tenured position. In many, many domains, you have to be doing things where you're the lead, and so you will have either a very small research group or no research group so that you can make sure that you establish yourself intellectually. Her behaviors, she uses a lot of email, but also uses internal networks heavily, very, very much so. Does rely on research social networks and such as ResearchGate and academia.edu more than any other demographic. Now, I want to make a point. We are talking about professional maturity. So this person isn't necessarily younger or older. It's where they are in their professional life. And that's one of the things when we've been looking through demographics. Age may not be as big a predictor. We're not quite there with finishing our analysis, but it may not be as big a predictor as professional maturity. We know for sure professional maturity is. We've seen that for sure. The rest we're working on now. She rarely uses reference or learning management software to share, and interestingly enough, is not likely to share with students. And part of that is a concern for, am I doing something right or wrong, and being a little bit confused about what the rules are for educational purposes of sharing. This is an issue in that we do know the habits that professionals and budding academics acquire as they're being educated are what they'll carry into the future. So if articles or journals are shared at an early stage in a person's educational career, that will likely be something that they keep thinking about. Oh, I remember I went to this journal, had this great article when I was in school. So this is an important concept for us. Leslie notes, pay gates to research content is frustrating when it isn't accessible via the university. The whole point of academic research is to share knowledge. And we'll get back to this in the conclusion. The whole point of academic research is to share knowledge. This person is committed to being a scholar and not thinking about the business behind scholarship. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as we move forward as well. And finally, we have, and thank you for this name, Rob, it's a tongue twister for me, Hikaru Maedorikawa. And he is a student, a PhD student in engineering. Maybe working as an adjunct faculty member, but less than 10 years for sure. And most of his work is in a research group, which is very, very common in engineering and science, as you know, for PhD students. Mostly shares by email. And this is a point that we mention here because the other groups that we went through were aware of Creative Commons and copyright restrictions. We found the PhD students, particularly in the hard sciences, were not cognizant of this, really. Awareness had not been built. And when he does share, he can reach a lot of people with a small number of posts because of the way the network works within his domain, which is kind of interesting as well. There is a lot of pressure to make research publicly available, especially federally funded research, and also at the same time, not share full-text articles from the journals unless you order reprints from them directly. I want to honor both of these, but it's very difficult. There's much confusion on how to do this, and the need to share research quickly, usually by email, ends up winning. So what he's thinking about is he doesn't want to break any rules, so he's thought about that as far as the journal, thinking about the reprint versus not the reprint, but he's also thinking about doing research quickly. And some of our speakers yesterday were talking about people having to establish themselves as researchers and using social media to do so. Cassidy Shigemoto was talking about using social media to reach out. One of these is, how do you balance that? So we've come up with some preliminary conclusions as well, and would love to have a conversation with all of you. First off, sharing, as we know, supports conducting research and disseminating results. This is a tenet of young scholars, senior scholars. It's all about the scholarship. They want to do the right thing for scholarly work, as everybody in this room does. We all want to move knowledge forward. But velocity, or sharing speed, is a key concern. The velocity of scholarship is slowed down when it's too difficult to share. And so at any point, as we saw in the quotes, speed wins. Formal communication channels are chosen because it fits the work style. And I heard in a session down the hall earlier where we were talking about publishers and sharing, talking about how do you fit the work style. This is really key. We're going to have to understand how people in different domains or different disciplines work to be able to figure out what can we do to help with sharing and help understand what's going on beyond the download, but we have to fit with what people are already doing. You can't really introduce something new. Informal channel use is not yet strong, but it's on the horizon. We see that with both our doctoral student, Hikaru, and also with Leslie. They're starting to think about how to use that. And of course, the other day, Cassidy was talking a lot about how social media and that whole session was as well. Organizational culture sets the context and the constraints. We are seeing a huge difference between academic and non-academic researchers. It makes a big difference. A lot of labs outside of academe have limited, very, very limited access to materials. Not all labs, but a lot do, and it makes a huge difference. I am not as funny as he is. I need a... Rob, you're a stand-up comedian. We may need you. He once did that for a little bit. And new measures must fit the culture. So when our next step 4, is thinking about what those what kind of measures can be instituted. And I know technologically, I was hearing about a lot of ideas and a lot of things that are already being instituted by you publishers, which are great. But one of the things we have to always look at is that sociocultural fit of the measure. So how can we do that? And also the sociocultural acceptance. We authors need to be thinking about, if this is being tracked, does this bring value to my career? What we did here in some of the focus groups is we had a couple editors of journals in a couple of the focus groups. And they were like, well, I always tell my colleagues, don't take it from me, go and get it from the site so we can show that the journal's being used. So they understood the value of having the download directly from the site. But other people in the room, it was all about velocity, scholarship velocity, and it must be fast. So this last piece, the cultural piece, is huge, and it's something I don't doubt that the technology exists. I've read about the technology. I've heard many of you speak. I know the technology is there for us to get after the download, but we need to be thinking about how to do it to where it fits the culture as well, and people will accept it. And I heard somebody on the last panel say, "No, we don't want to. We don't want to be Big Brother. Don't use that terminology. That's not how we do it." And that's good. We do have to be very cognizant of those things. And as we finish the analysis on these data, we should find out more. So moving forward, we are continuing on our analysis. Our little group of people there, we are always looking for input and partners and other folks who are in this area. We would like to work together with anybody who would like to work with us as well. And we hope you look forward to our next stage of results. And we open it up for questions. Yes? I'm going to pass that to Rob so he has a chance to join us here.
We did have some humanities responses. The sample size was very small. So that could be, like you said, it could be because of the pool we came from, or just because that was the luck of the draw, I guess.
Well, it is largely the pool we came from. Carol Tenneper and I are the U.S. PIs on this, and we're very heavily focused on the science side. And so that is, when we were working with Elsevier, that is the pool we worked from. We would like to expand it into the humanities. It's always hard to know where to draw the boundaries. Yeah.
So what's the geographical makeup of the sample? Can you pull anything out interestingly different attitudes to share it?
You want to?
I saw a UK flag. So.
Do you want to answer? I'm happy to answer if you want. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. We will be able to report US, UK, and then it'll be a rest of the world. Unfortunately, we really don't have a substantial enough sample to do much, to tease down much beyond that. But US, UK, we are very substantial, and we have the numbers to look at that.
Yeah, so there's different tensions at play in terms of
yes. There's that. There's the whole process of how you are in academia and how your career progresses. There's a lot of differences in the two locations, and yeah, we're looking at that.
We were able to break it down by Human Development Index, what countries lie within various regions or various high, medium, very high, low on the human development, and we did have some results that we were able to look at and say this is something substantial.
We're teasing you so you come back and read more of what we do in the future. Yeah, and then I'll move back. No, that wasn't really something that was not the purpose of this study.
Well, I was wondering how much sharing happens in total.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, do we have a measure of what's being undercounted? Our critical incident technique will not give us how the frequency in that way. We can extrapolate but we will not have an actual count. We will be extrapolating what we think it looks like, but it is not, it's not like we said, you know, being able to get every incident that they had since. The reason we use the critical incident technique is because if you ask people to think over the last 6 months what they did, they're going to estimate, but we can't get we don't know exactly how thorough they are in remembering. It's very hard. I mean, I have trouble remembering last week, you know. And then secondly, we can't tease down and get the detail. With the critical incident technique and asking somebody to focus on the last time they did it, we can ask a lot more detail about the behavior. And the more we understand about the behavior, the more we will be able to talk about what we're learning and understand why they're doing what they're doing. One of the things that came up yesterday when they were talking about using social media was that it all has to be in context, because you know if they're tweeting about that really short abstract and that's all they're saying about it, it isn't really about the science. The critical incident technique gives us that context to really be able to understand the question. I think there's plenty of responsibility to go around, because I think also in developing the workforce of future researchers, I think we could also help people understand why this is important and the value that it has for the individual involved, not just for another entity. And there is a value. As an author, I want to know how many people are using my work beyond citations. There's a lot of things that people read and frame their ideas, but it might not be cited in their article. And you know, to know that would be really great. So, you know what? Maybe you want to come up and use a mic. I think people are having trouble hearing us. What? I'm not picking just on you. It's just that. How do you turn them on?
Sure. I just wanted to ask, you brought up an important question about you as an author. So you talked about the statistical differences between tenure versus non-tenure and professional maturity. So did you evaluate the number of papers, so how people were sharing information and what their behavior was if they had authored a number of papers?
We did not address that in the survey itself. We just asked for an academic or professional maturity level of rank and position. But within the focus groups and the interviews, we did have comments where people were very, the more publications that they had out there, the more cognizant and aware of any potential sharing, and they wanted to know when and how and why it was shared. There was a great difference in that in the level, the publication levels, I guess you would say, but we did not go into that great detail in the survey itself.
One of the things we haven't actually fully worked out yet is when you talk about the tenure issue, and as Lisa was saying, incentivizing people. And right now, you know, tenure committees are the oldest, professionally speaking, the most mature of the scholars, and they are not necessarily the scholars who understand some of these issues that are coming up or how that should count towards a person being judged as a scholar. So what we have at a lot of places, and I'm not saying everywhere, and I'm not saying every discipline either, but a lot of disciplines are still stuck with people being analyzed in the same way they have in the past. And I'll just speak from personal experience here. Because I work with scientists, I do a lot of co-authored works. But I work in a field where many of the folks who are in doing tenure reviews are working from a humanist point of view, and that is a sole author is the coin of the realm. And, you know, it's just, if I were only I mean, I have sole authorships too, but if I were only a sole author with the partners I work with, I would be considered somebody who can't play in a sandbox, and, you know, I wouldn't have any partners. So we are facing those kinds of sociocultural issues about this as well.
Is there any attempt to find out from participants whether they're aware of articles that are sharing by already free access or not?
So the question was there, did we ask participants if they looked to see if the articles were free access or not? Go ahead, Lisa.
Within this survey, we had a couple, well, at least one question that addressed if all articles were freely available on the web, would you share more, would you share less, or would it be no change at all? And surprisingly, the having all articles freely available, or open access if you would call it, did not greatly impact their perception of what their sharing would be in the future. Yes?
Maybe you said this before I got in, but did you have a good sense of when people said they were sharing articles, whether they understood whether the article was a final fully published article or the author's final manuscript, whether they actually understood what they were sharing?
So the question, just because I know if people have had trouble hearing, is do we have a sense of whether people who were sharing recognized that it was a final version or not of the author's work when they were sharing it? We know from the focus groups that authors, people who were multiply published, were very aware that there are different versions and what they had been allowed to share or put in an institutional repository versus what was a final published version, et cetera, et cetera. I would have to go back through the notes to give you a totally definitive answer, but I would say that is a level of granularity that most people are not yet aware of when they're thinking of sharing. I go back to the velocity of scholarship, which is huge. People are investigating a question, and when they're investigating a question, they want to do what they can to get to the answer quickly. And so, you know, whether it's a lit review or whether it's informing in some other way as far as looking at methods or something, that was about speed. And I think we saw in the earlier today the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon about, you know, how long somebody thinks about a particular thing, and to a certain degree, even when scholars are doing the really deep work, we definitely heard that they want to spend the time they have on thinking and not on the process of how do I share this, so just whatever's the quickest, most expedient way that fits their work. And so I don't know that, I can't really answer that question fully, but I can tell you that not everybody was aware of it, and we do other research in the area of trust and how do people decide how to trust scholarly resources. And I can tell you from that research that the trust of the resource is heavily laid on the people who are writing it, the connectivity within their own network of whether it's someone they know they can trust, and the journal. And but in that research, we know they haven't necessarily been thinking about what version of the article they're looking at.
I do recall in one of the focus groups we did have one of the participants mentioned that he was hesitant to share anything that wasn't the final version. He didn't like sharing a preprint. He wanted his most definitive work to be shared. So the idea of being limited to sharing his preprints and not his final version was somewhat, he was disgruntled by, I guess is the nicest way of saying. He was rather crotchety.
And it's disciplinary too, because physicists, you know, archive was started because they wanted to share as quickly as possible, and that's all preprint. So, other questions? Well, I think I have a question for you. First off, how many people in the room are publishers or publisher related? Gosh, just about all of you. And how many are, like I am, where I'm attached to the publishing industry because I'm studying it, but not directly a publisher, or maybe in education or something else? Okay. Well, this is a really, really good mix in this room, because I do think what we're looking at, partially from the sociocultural point of view, is an education issue. And you're shaking your head. David, do you have a thought on that? Yeah.
No, sorry.
Something else? Okay. No, that's cool. That's cool. I just thought you were reacting to this, and that's cool. No, that's fine. And I didn't mean to call you out. But so from the publisher point of view first, is there anybody who'd like to talk about how, what they think we need to do to help understand the download issue? And then from the other side, what do you think are the biggest issues that we're facing? Anybody have some thoughts?
Since they want to share, why don't we make it easy for them to share? Because after all, we're supposed to be in the business of actually helping our audience. And if we give them a tool to share, maybe then we can embed into that tool the tracking system so that we can measure it. Because that's what we really need. We need the data. We need to be able to measure so we can report back to our authors and they can report back to their funders. At OECD, we make all our content shareable freely, the full text. You can even embed it. In fact, we encourage people to share and embed our content because it gives us a bigger audience. And a bigger audience means we get more sales. When we get more sales, we can stay in business, so we can attract and serve our authors better. So it's a virtuous circle. So rather than trying to put up barriers and blocking people from doing what they really want to do, put in place systems that actually make it easier for them to do it on a basis that we can measure, and then we're going to have a much better solution for everybody.
Just to add to that, so if we're going to do that, I think then the following thing we have to do is we have to have a conversation about surveillance, because this is something that's come up over the last couple of days in various places at this meeting, and it's been sitting with me. The framing around tracking and measuring is framed in some understandably fairly unpleasant metaphors. And yet actually there is a societal need, if we really are going to find out what the value is of the stuff that gets published from the research that gets done. The only way to understand that kind of stuff is to surveil what happens to that material. So we need to be involved in that, and I think we need to be involved in trying to turn the framework for that kind of discussion around onto a much better set of more positive views on what's happening when people are using material, and that's not going to be an easy thing to do.
Anyone from the other side of the tracks like to make a comment?
I'm on the other side of the tracks, so I'm not sure what side that is. So I actually don't see this argument. I'm a consultant, whatever side that is. Maybe that means rating the But I actually see this as an economic argument, in that since the very first printing press, there's been sharing. But, and the system is always the same, but it's getting weaker all the time. And so what this really boils down to is a group of individuals that add value to create content need to be able to hold enough of this content for long enough in order to realize some sort of payback for the value they're creating. So I don't think any publisher would say they deny what academics want to share. I think they're really saying you need to somehow hold that content close enough, long enough, so they can realize some sort of economic payback. Emotions, morals, all of this are really side effects of the real economics of a weak system. That's how I see it.
And I think we have time for one more comment.
So, what I'm wondering is if this is a moment in time problem, and on that magical day that the web progresses to something that people feel confident that they can have, in the way they can have a PDF, they can let go of the PDF, scholars can let go of the PDF, and share something that brings them back to where the thing lives, then we can all
Well, it's nice to end on a thought for the future. And I thank all of you for coming, and I'm sorry to keep you 2 or 3 minutes late, but it was a great conversation. I appreciate you joining the three of us.